Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so excited to announce my guest for this week. Being the week prior to Mother's Day, I thought it would be fascinating for all of us to discuss the roles of women and the types of things that women faced in the past and are facing now and continue to face. Even though there's been many issues throughout history that have changed, there are some that have not. And today, as my guest, I wanted to have a woman of standing in our current times with what she is working on, as well as an author of historical fiction. So welcome with me, Cynthia Simmons. She has been a president in the past of the Christian Authors Guild. She hosts Heart of the Matter radio show. She also is passionate, as am I, about encouraging women to seek God's excellence in their lives. And I love that about her. Her novel, Pursuing Gold, shares how women can live through hard times by following God. Isn't that wonderful? She's actually a retired nurse, so well-being is another thing that she focuses on in the way that she addresses women, a holistic sense of well-being. So welcome with me, former homeschool mother and writer for many different magazines, Cynthia Simmons.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
I'm so excited to have you here today. So tell me about your novel, Pursuing Gold.
Well, this novel took place in the Civil War, and obviously things were a little different back then. And the lady and her friend own a bank together, and they are struggling with how money is handled in the Civil War, because at that time they were using coins over paper because coins had the value. And in fact, they wouldn't have valued paper as much as, other things. And so the Confederacy didn't want to pass a legal tender law. They eventually began to use legal tender, which is paper. But when paper began to come out, they began to worry about their bank and think, well, if someone comes to us and gives us paper, then we really got nothing. So the struggle was trying to survive in a society where there was war threatening, but then also figuring out how they were how they were going to buy things and how they were going to interact with people in a world that was changing economically.
Isn't that interesting that we're talking about value in your novel and how women's value is such a volatile and slippery thing today? What was a woman's value and worth based upon in the Civil War era?
Well, a woman was expected to be a wife and mother and to be, cook, clean, unless she had someone to be a maid for her. But they were valued for what they did in the home. And not that that's a bad thing, because obviously God wants us to be mothers. If we're not mothers, we don't have the next generation. But they would value more or less what happened in the home rather than outside. And Mary Beth does get into trouble a little bit because she does work in the bank. Her father was a banker. Now he's sick, and her partner's son is running it. But she was taught by her father to work in the bank, and so she goes and does stuff in the bank, and people kind of look at her like strange because that's not done at that time period, but that's what she grew up with.
That's interesting too, because today we struggle with what we do, whether it's what we do in the home or what we do outside of the home, and deciding whether doing something in the home is better or doing something outside of the home is better. The definition of womanhood has become even more complicated, but still just as difficult, because none of those things ever really fulfill us unless we're following a gifting because God has put it in front of us. It's not the thing itself that we do that's fulfilling. So that's interesting. If a woman in the Civil War era, for example, would have found only value if she was good at cooking, and what if she's not? What if that's not her talent?
That's right.
She would have
Mary Beth couldn't cook. She had maids and stuff that she had a cook that did that for her. But she did know how to sew, and the whole book kind of has this whole thing of what do you value, and they had to pursue gold to keep the bank alive, and they learned to pursue God through the story because he's the one that gave them value.
And that is our true goal, is pursuing the truth of God's worth in us and our true potential and purpose.
That's right.
Now, a woman in the Civil War era would have had a different standard of what she considered would be beautiful. And we have a pressure to be beautiful now, different things. What did that look like in the Civil War? What were the pressures for a woman concerning beauty?
Well, the skirts were long. They most and the upper class women would have had the hook skirts so that they wouldn't have been able to have done a lot of hard work because I've dressed up like that and it's really hard to move because you can't get through doorways and stuff. They would have had a long skirt. Usually they didn't show their arms. Their sleeves were long. Occasionally you'd see women, especially at parties, that the upper part was showing, but you were covered pretty well. And when they went outside, they wore hats. Now, young girls would have their hair down. But when you got to be a certain age, you started wearing your hair up. So, and hats outside. They didn't want to be in the sun because a person in the sun, when they get a tan, was not a wealthy person. So they didn't want sun. So they a lot of times wore a hat when they were outside.
So even though it's different, we don't cover up as much. There's just as much impractical things for women, the high heels that women are expected to wear that are particularly good for your body, or the shaping. They had corsets and things back then.
They did have corsets, yes.
And we have those now. They're called Spanx. So.
Right. The corset, the idea of the corset was to try to give them a very tiny waist because they valued the hourglass figure. And, not every woman is an hourglass. If you've noticed, you have some women that are triangles and upside down triangles and downside triangles. And some women have just a real straight frame. And then there are the hourglass. So everybody's a little bit different, but they were trying to make all the figures look the same by doing that corset where they would really pull the laces very, very tight. And it was restrictive. And I think because of that, labors lasted longer during that time. That's a benefit of my nursing is that I learned that after women stopped wearing those so much, labor shortened.
There's current research that I've looked into that say that Spanx are bad for the body, for the digestion, and they can cause all kinds of problems medically for women today. So we continue to do things based on what our standards of beauty are today that are damaging to our bodies as a result, instead of embracing who we are and how God made us and that we can be all shapes and be beautiful from the inside out when we embrace how we're made. So that is interesting that has not changed despite all that has on the outside.
That hasn't changed.
What about shame issues? Did women struggle with shame issues in the Civil War era?
Yeah, they would. If they had to be careful who they were seen with, or if they were seen alone with a man, they pretty much had to be engaged. You couldn't go out by yourself. If you were a single woman, you need to be out with a maid or out with a parent. You couldn't just walk up and down the streets. And if you were married, you could, but you usually had an escort. And so there was a lot. You had to be careful what you said, what you did, because you didn't want to appear to be a fast person.
Okay. So that's a little different than some of the shame issues today, because they were basing that shame on how people saw you with men. But today we have shame issues based on what has happened with men that has been a terrible traumatic experience for a lot of women, or the abuse, the physical and verbal abuse that women often experience, not simply at the hands of men. Sometimes the verbal abuse that women today experience are from other women. Did they experience shaming from one another back in the Civil War era?
Oh, yeah, they had longer sentences when they did, because they talked much more formally. They probably used contractions, but not as much as we do. They would have had a much more formal speech, but yes, they could blister each other. Oh, yeah. And have arguments. Oh, yes.
So women were fighting with each other instead of supporting each other, even in the Civil War times.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
It continues to be an issue for women today instead of working together. Did women in the Civil War era have that same struggle that we do now, never feeling like they could be good enough?
Actually, I read a diary by a lady in the Civil War, and she told a really interesting story. She was walking into someone's house, and when she walked in, there was a hallway. There was a set of mirrors. There was one in the hallway and one in the room she was going to go in. And she saw what she thought was her friend. And she said, oh, in her mind, she says, oh, she's just so beautiful. I just wish I was like her. And then she began to realize that the mirrors were showing her herself and that she was looking at a reflection of herself. So, oh, yeah, women have always had that issue. Whatever they see in the mirror is not good enough.
That is so interesting. It's a timeless issue that we shame ourselves as much as we shame one another and experience shame from our culture. It's something that we continually need to pursue the gold, like your book says.
Yeah.
God breaking us free from that, and similar to what my book is about as well. What would be a woman's role in faith? Did she have that as a center of her life in the Civil War era, or was that something that was more legalistic than it was relational back then?
Actually, I wrote about a particular city, the town that I grew up in, and I had the pastor of the town that I knew of was a very strong Christian and preached very strongly the gospel. So, yes, they would have understood it and understood redemption, and have, each one of them would have wanted to have a relationship with Christ. They were very strong Christians in that time.
Okay, so that is something that has definitely shifted. We've become a society that wants to believe there are so many different ways to God that that can become confusing for women how to be culturally relevant and then answer the issues of emptiness in their souls when they don't feel like they're satisfied spiritually with what they're getting from their neighborhood and their community. So that is something that's negative that has changed for women over the years, would you say?
Yep. Probably. I know there were probably some in other areas that were just a legalistic church where you did this and you didn't do that. But there were also a lot of pockets of people that really understood the gospel and were preaching it very strongly, because all my research indicates that it was a very strong time to know the Lord.
That's good. I wish we could get back to some of that.
I wish we could too.
Centered community. And you see that still in pockets today where people are in communities that are very faith-centered. And the way we grow that is by supporting one another and being in relationships with one another as women and as community. As Beth Moore says, we can be mothers and we can be others. Even if you're not a mother this Mother's Day, you can be supportive of other women and other young girls in helping them understand that relationship with Christ and being supportive of one another as we should be. Parenting and family, were there any differences in the roles of women in the family back in the Civil War era?
In the Civil War era, they might be less likely to call their husband by his first name just out of respect, because respect was a little different at that time. I know a lot of women spoke to their husbands as Mr. So-and-so rather than using his first name, which seems a little stilted to us, but to them it was not. For instance, Susanna Spurgeon called her husband Mr. Spurgeon. And that's what she believed he was a godly man. And so that was, for her, that was respect. And that seems really strange to us, but for them it did not.
It does. So did the men show respect to women in the family as moms and wives?
Well, after the Reformation, when they began to teach that the wives were as good as the men and that they were a person made in the image of God, that did help that. Now, I'm not going to say that every man out there was treated his wife well and that kind of thing, because I'm sure there were plenty of opportunities for men to do the wrong thing. But if the family was a godly family, the man was taught by his pastor to respect his wife. I mean, it's there in Scripture.
That is interesting. And we have issues with that now, with how we can be respectful toward each other from both sides. Can women be respectful? Can men be respectful? Can we both be mutually respectful toward each other in the home, not one more respected and exclusively respected instead of the other? So that is an interesting thing that is different now.
It wasn't uncommon for a man to keep secrets from his wife if there was something bad going on, say in the family, or if someone was sick, or that sort of thing. He might keep a secret from his wife because he felt like she couldn't handle it. That was something that happened.
So women were not perceived as being strong.
No, they were not.
Which is definitely different in a good way. Now, we do recognize that women are strong. I don't know how we could have missed that, considering what we do in childbirth.
I know. All they have to do is watch us give birth, and they know we're strong.
Exactly. And how we protect our children, the way that we are fiercely protective of those that we love, shows our strength. But our greatest strengths are in those areas, in the way that we love, in the way that we nurture. That's where our strength is shown. What about legacy? What is the kind of legacy that a woman in the Civil War would have hoped to leave for her family or those that cared about her after she was gone? Was that an issue that people thought about, how people will remember me after I die?
They would have wanted to be thought of as a good household manager.
Okay. So how you kept your house clean and cooked was your legacy.
And you're mothering. You know, you'd want to be a good mother, but a good homemaker.
Okay. And so women do have more options with regard to their legacy now.
Mm-hmm.
It could be that you were a good mother, even today, as part of our legacy. But that isn't the only thing that is part of our legacy. It's how
No, it isn't.
so how other people feel after being in our presence and being impacted by our lives and whatever our giftings are. So that can be extended to a lot of things. Were there any confusions with regard to what it meant to be feminine or what it meant to be a woman in the Civil War area? Or was that fairly clear and standard everywhere?
That was pretty clear. Yeah. Yeah. And I think we blurred that line so much now that we almost have to talk about what is feminine and what is masculine. But back then, people knew and were confident.
I think that has become a great area of confusion for women because women don't know anymore, do I need to be this way or that way? Does this mean I'm feminine? Does this mean I'm not? And the reality is there isn't one thing that determines our femininity, and it may look different for every woman, just like the main character in your story being a banker. Working for a bank would be still, she didn't lose her femininity. She didn't lose her womanhood by doing those things, but it certainly wasn't fitting the mold.
Yeah, you know, regardless of what we do, we are nurturers, and we're going to do whatever we do with that kind of twist usually. And in addition to that, she also made medicines. She would mix herbs and make medicines for her father, and then she began to mix herbs for other people as well for medicines. So a lot of that was nurturing for her, that she could help people and minister to them in a way with her medicine. So, you know, like I say, regardless of what we do, like the lady in Proverbs 31, everything she did was a nurturing kind of a twist. So we respond differently to whatever we do, because a man's brain is kind of wired differently. So,
and it's interesting that we have all those things in the Proverbs 31 woman.
Yes, we do.
We don't have to be all of those things, though, because that's overwhelming. If you look at that woman, you want to say she needs to stop it because nobody can do all of it.
That's right.
So, but when we look at that, we can see these are all the different ways that we can fulfill.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. That we have the freedom to do that.
Yeah. Anything else that stands out to you in general about the roles or the lifestyles of women in the Civil War as they compare to women today?
Well, the thing about women today that kind of worries me is that a lot of women feel like, and you're hearing it today on the news, that there's this thing, 10 years, the world's going to end, don't have any more children. And I think that's kind of scary, because if we don't have children, the men simply can't have them. You know, if we don't have children, there's not going to be another generation. So we need to be willing to be mothers and trust the future to God. You know, I think that command in the Old Testament about be fruitful and multiply, it takes two to do that, husband and wife. But I think that's what he wants us as women to do, is to have the next generation. So being a mother is a very important job. And I don't mean to make people feel bad that can't have children. That's not what I'm trying to do. But I'm just saying that that's something that I think we ought to value regardless of what generation we're in.
Mm-hmm. And I think whether you can be physically, biologically a mother, or whether you are being a mother to those in your community, because again, you are still have an opportunity to be a nurturer and to share with love. And fear and anxiety is the opposite of that creative force of love.
Yes, it is.
And the creative force of love is the power and the strength of a woman. If we are doing the things out of that power and that strength, that creative force of love, then we will have a legacy to leave as mothers or others. And that's an important thing to embrace instead of insecurity and instead of fear.
That's right.
Well, it's been so wonderful having you today. I loved that we had such insights from the Civil War to discuss the roles and the insecurities and the issues that women faced then and today. And I would love to hear all of your comments and your feedback about this interview. I look forward to seeing you again soon, Cynthia, and wish you very well on your book, Pursuing Gold. Can you tell viewers and readers where they might find your book?
Well, I am named after my father, whose name was C.L. Thomas. He didn't have any initials. He was just simply C.L. So now that he's gone, I am Cynthia L. Simmons after him. And so my website is clsimmons.com. So all you have to do is remember my dad's name was CL with nothing but just initials, and it's clsimmons.com. You can find me there, or if you Google me, Cynthia L. Simmons, I'm all over the place. I'm easy to find.
Okay. Well, be sure to look for her book, Pursuing Gold, and to look at her Heart of the Matter radio show, which, where can they find that? Do you have a web address for that?
That is right on my website. If you go right up there, the calendar is right on that very first page, and then across the top, you'll see where you can find all the old sessions.
So go to her website and find all of her wonderful materials and follow her. Thank you, Cynthia, and I hope that you have a wonderful and blessed pursuit of gold and a wonderful Mother's Day.
Well, you have a great Mother's Day, too. Thanks for having me.